So, growing up in India, I was curious about where Indians came from. Um, we realized that humans originated in Africa and then they kind of migrated around and just kind of, did they go straight to India? They went somewhere else? What? So, now the history that we had was mainly based on like archaeological evidence. And I did not find the conclusions satisfactory for two reasons. One is that this evidence only went back like a few thousand years, maybe 5,000 years. And I wanted to know like where my ancestors were 20,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, and so on. And secondly, I was not very convinced about the inferences that were made based on archaeological or linguistic evidence. Now, of course, there were some tantalizing facts like the similarities of the Indo-European languages. So, natural question to ask was these people who spoke these languages, they spoke the same language because they had the same ancestors, or they spoke the same language because somebody who was the neighbor, they spoke that language, and from the neighbor they learned that language, and the diffusion continued. So the similarity in language is not conclusive evidence. It could be either because of shared ancestry, or it can be just diffusion. There's also there was this there's this controversy about whether the Aryans, so-called Aryans, I mean it's a term which is being misused, and whether they came from outside India into India or they went from India to outside. Now, let me say at the very beginning, this is a useless, it's a useless debate. Who came from where? It's good to kind of like, I'm inquisitive, it's good to know, but it doesn't have any great implications. Where we came from is not important. Where we are going is what is important. So don't get too hung up about where your ancestors came from and all. It's just knowledge about history, you can say, and then it can help you understand the world better, but it is not in any way definitive about anything about humans. So some people say, hey, our ancestors also like went to your country and or conquered your country or whatever. But the response is, okay, so the people from your ancient community, the ones who are more adventurous and more had more initiative, they left and went to some other country, and you are the descendant of the people who did not move. That's not very something to be very proud of. See, this is just like you can make many such arguments. So anyway, the point is, it is not important where you came from. What is important is where you are going. Okay, so let's just look at the scientific history of humans. Most scientists believe that modern humans originated in East Africa about 150,000, 200,000 years ago, and significant migrations out of Africa started about 50,000 years ago. So these migrants, they dispersed around the globe, and they went through long periods of relative isolation whereby the endogamous populations develop different characteristics, including languages, religions, and genetic signatures. And these genetic signatures enable us to track their movements, and that is a scientific history. So, over the last couple of decades, we've got a lot of data on the genetic signatures, population genetics. Now, this following is something mainly from something I wrote about 15 years ago. So, some of this data is dated. There's been a lot of research done since I wrote this. So, and sometimes you look at the research and it says, oh, this is what this particular community, this is their genetic signatures. And then later another research will come out, no, that's not right. Because also this research hasn't reached the point where they have done, the data set is very large and it's not reached that point yet. So these results change. Okay. Now, what is this genetic signatures? So there are two kinds of DNA in our body. Okay. Now, the one you know commonly is the spiral helix, discovered by Watson and Crick. Okay. And that is in the nucleus. And there's also other kind of DNA. And that's actually outside the nucleus. It's in the rest of the cell, and it's called mitochondrial DNA. Now, what happens during reproduction is that, the sperm of the father fuses the egg of the mother, and the sperm contains DNA from the nucleus from what is it called, meiosis? I think it's meiosis, not mitosis. I don't remember the biology I studied so long ago. But anyway, so the sperm, which is a product of that, which has half of that, fuses with the mother's egg, also has half, and they form the nucleus, which is 23 pairs of chromosomes. However, the egg has some other DNA, and that's the mitochondrial DNA. So the mitochondrial DNA doesn't have any contribution from the father. So your mitochondrial DNA, whether you're a man or a woman or something else, your mitochondrial DNA, as long as you're human, comes entirely from your mother. Now that lets you do something. It lets you trace matrilineage. So it lets you trace the line of your mother's 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 mother. Okay. Now, of course, this DNA which a mother passes on to her children is almost identical to her own DNA, but there are little mutations which happen once in a while. Similarly, the son inherits the entire DNA of the Y chromosome from his father. So my Y chromosome DNA in my body is almost identical to my father. There may have been a mutation at some point, and this mutation has to occur. If it's going to be in every cell of my body, it has to occur while the Y chromosome was still in the sperm, or when the embryo was still just one cell. So as I was saying, I was trying to figure out the history of Indians, and the haplogroup R1A, which is marked by the Y chromosome with that R1A mutation, occurs in large frequencies in well-off Indian communities, but also in not so well-off Indian communities like tribals. Now, besides R1A, a very common haplogroup which occurs in high frequencies for Indians is H, which is you can call that the Dravidian haplogroup. Now, some of the most accomplished Indian communities are these southern Indian communities. They have produced like great mathematicians, chess players, authors, etc. Now, these southern Indian communities are ones which are well off. Still, they show a very large percentage of the Dravidian haplogroup. So, this idea that these communities are the descendants of Aryan invaders and who came and is not true, because about a third of the Y chromosome haplogroups for these communities is actually H, and about a third is R1A. So it just shows you that there was these communities are essentially descendants of some amount of original Dravidian communities which are there in India, and some of the ones Aryans who came and okay, now here's some funny things that you realize once you actually have the scientific evidence. Hitler made a big deal. He said that, my people are super and we are the Uber and the others are Unter. However, if you look at the scientific evidence, the people who call themselves Arya, the word was Arya, which is like noble, were the Indo-European branch, Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European people. And they were primarily R1A or R2. R2 occurs mainly in India. Okay, that's why I said it could be R2, but I think maybe just R1A. Now, if you look at the population genetics, and Russians have a greater percentage of R1A, 46%, compared to Germans, who are at 24%. And Levite Jews have 51% R1A ancestry. So, someone can make the claim these Levite Jews are twice as Aryan as the Germans, according to this evidence. Of course, there is a significant amount of the other main Indo-European haplogroup, which is R1b. So Germans have a lot of that. They have a lot of R1b. English are almost entirely R1b. I think Spanish also are almost entirely R1b. The Germans actually have, what Hitler usually thought was, like when he said Aryan, he thought they were Scandinavians, Nordics. Germans, the Nordic haplogroup is I. And Germans, yes, they do have a lot of the Nordic haplogroup. But the main haplogroup for them still is either R1A or R1B. Similarly, the Finns, who again, they share a lot of common ancestry with Russians, North Russians, which is like sort of expected. Okay, now you also see that the Y chromosome haplogroups are much more geographically dispersed compared to the mtDNA haplogroups. What that tells you about history is that historically it is the men who went out, migrating or rampaging, and then they went to other areas and they had children with the local women. So the Y chromosome was much more mobile, and the empty DNA was much more geographically concentrated. So a lot of the modern populations are, when you see, let's say high proportion of R1A somewhere, it could either be that R1A men came to that area and had children with local women, in which case their descendants are actually mixtures of local and foreign. That's pretty much true for all over the world. Most modern populations are mixtures. Now, the last thing I'm going to do in this section is about the Y chromosome haplogroup F. It's a very interesting haplogroup. So you have this like small endogamous group, but now they constitute about 95% of the patrilineal lineages outside Africa. The haplogroup F, which is an older haplogroup. So, okay, where does what did F produce? So F haplogroup went like the next descendant was GHIJK, then you had the HIJK, and from that came H, which is the Dravidian South Asian population. Okay. Similarly, F also produced the Nordic population, I. So the Nordics are also descendants of haplogroup F, like the Dravidians, and of course, if you go far enough, if you go even back farther, we all came from Africa. I don't lose sight of that. But this is just a haplogroup F is an interesting haplogroup. It's of course newer compared to the populations which came out of Africa. So the F also produced the haplogroup J, which is the Semitic haplogroup, which is to be found in Middle East, North Africa, India, and European Jews. F produced the N Finnish haplogroup is also a descendant of F. And okay, so out of this thing, you see as F starts, as time passes and F haplogroup develops new mutations by which you identify these newer haplogroups. So F was the ancestor haplogroup. The descendant haplogroup was GHIJK, and GHIJK also broke up into HIJK, which now this HIJK, that population broke up into H and also this JI. And from this JI population came the Nordics and the Semitics. So in terms of ancestry, the Nordics and the Semitics are more recent than, let's say, the Finns and the Indo-Europeans. It's kind of intriguing that the Nordics and the Semitics have a more recent ancestry. Similarly, the haplogroup from which the Finns come, this N, its parent was NO, which is also the parent haplogroup of O, which is the Chinese, East Asian, East Indian, eastern part of India haplogroup O. So the Finns and the Chinese have a relatively more recent shared ancestry. Similarly, the Native Americans and the Indo-Europeans have a more recent shared ancestry because they both are descendants of this haplogroup P, which of course also came from F, but So compared to the Finns and the Chinese, the Native Americans and Indo-Europeans have more recent shared ancestry. Okay, just very interesting to learn about where these different populations, what their ancestry is. But again, like I said, it's not important where you came from. What's important is where you're going. Your life is very, very, very special. Don't waste it. Build something. Don't have animosity towards others. Animosity is a waste of time. Help others if you can, but no buts. Help others if you can, and don't get into conflicts with people. Instead, build something.